The coastal train slowed as it curved through fog-thick dawn. Evan Reed pressed his forehead to the cold glass, the town's faded skyline trembling in reflection. 10 years away hadn't dulled its pull, just sharpened its ghosts. He carried a single worn leather bag and a camera that had seen more truth than he ever dared to speak. Every mile closer felt heavier, like walking back into a photograph he'd spent his life escaping. He wondered if she'd recognize him or worse, pretend not to. He had rehearsed their reunion 1,000 times in silence, but now the platform's mist swallowed his thoughts whole. The sea wind smelled the same. Salt, regret, and unspoken things. The hotel clerk's polite smile faltered when Evan signed the guest book. The name, Ride, still carried weight here, the kind that bent spines and whispered histories. He didn't mention who he was, and she didn't ask. As he waited for his room key, he noticed a banner draped across the staircase. Welcome, Seabright High Class of 2005. Beneath it, photos of his mother shimmered from event posters. Committee chair, Marianne Raitt. Her face, smooth as porcelain, stared back at him like a mirror he'd long stopped believing in. He felt the absurdity of it all. That she could shape the night, the guest list, the speeches, and still erase her son. In his room overlooking the ocean, Evan unpacked the essentials. Camera, notebook, a folded photograph. The walls were the same off-white as his childhood bedroom, sterile and watchful. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened the photo. Marianne, younger, radiant, holding him as a baby. A perfect portrait of a lie. He traced the edges until the paper began to curl. Outside, the surf pounded against the cliffs, echoing the ache beneath his ribs. Tomorrow night she'd stand under chandeliers, toasting to her triumphs. He wondered if she'd glance his way, or right through him. Night deepened, and with it came the scent of salt and old memories. Evan walked along the shoreline, camera in hand. Every shutter click captured something he couldn't say aloud. The pier lights blurring into halos, footprints vanishing under retreating waves. It was easier to frame the world through glass than face it bare. Yet even through the lens, he saw her face in everything. Beauty constructed, fragile, trembling under pressure. He wondered if revenge would feel like justice, or just another photograph that couldn't bring back what was lost. Back at the hotel, laughter spilled from the ballroom as early arrivals gathered. Evan lingered at the threshold, unseen. Through the open doors, Mariana's voice carried. Melodic, commanding, unmistakable. She moved through the crowd in a sapphire dress, every gesture rehearsed. When her gaze swept across the doorway, it paused. For the briefest second, before sliding past him. No recognition. No name. Just a stranger in a borrowed suit. The applause rose around her like surf swallowing sound, and Evan realized this was the first act of his quiet revenge. The ballroom shimmered like a dream resurrected from dust. Sequins, champagne, nostalgia. Evan slipped through the crowd unseen, his camera tucked inside his jacket as if it were a weapon. Marianne commanded the center of the room, laughter polished to perfection. Every word she spoke carried the weight of reputation. Every glance dismissed those who didn't matter. To her, he was nobody. A shadow at the edge of her kingdom. Yet Evan watched her gestures, her angles, the way she tilted her head for admiration. Years of pretending had sculpted her face into artifice. He realized then her entire life had become performance. And tonight, he was the silent witness. Derek Caldwell found him near the drink table, all effortless charm and nostalgia. Man, it's been forever, he said, clapping Evan's shoulder like they'd been friends. Evan smiled faintly. Derek hadn't recognized him either. He'd been invisible for so long it almost felt natural. Derek bragged about sales, houses, and golf trophies, the hollow rituals of small-town success. Evan listened, nodding, studying the subtle panic behind Derek's laughter, the same hunger that once defined them all. Beneath the chandelier's dazzle, The reunion glittered like fool's gold. Marianne's laughter floated across the room, rich and rehearsed. A cluster of admirers surrounded her, hanging on each embellished story. The charity gala in Seattle, the imagined European summers. She spoke of culture and connections, never once mentioning her son. Evan watched from afar, his jaw tight. Her lies were crafted with elegance, each word a stitch in her mask. But for the first time, he didn't feel anger, only pity. The woman before him wasn't his mother anymore, just an actress trapped in her own role. Near the photo booth, Evan found a wall lined with memories, framed snapshots of their graduating class. The smiles were frozen, untouched by disappointment. He saw himself there, younger, unguarded, beside Marianne, radiant with ambition. A woman's voice startled him. "You haven't changed much," she said. Lila Torres. Time had etched gentleness into her eyes. For a heartbeat. The fog lifted between past and present. She recognized him. Not from the face, but from the quiet. "You came back," she whispered. "Guess I did," he answered. Lila's hand brushed his arm, grounding him in the moment. "You know," she murmured, "there's a feature tonight. A guest photographer whose work changed lives." Evan's brow lifted slightly. "You'll want to stay," she added, a knowing smile curving her lips. Across the room, Mariana's laughter rose again, oblivious. Lila walked away, and Evan stood anchored in quiet revelation. The night was no longer about hiding. It was a countdown. Somewhere between pride and vengeance, a truth was waiting to detonate. The speeches began with polite applause and clinking glasses. Evan stayed in the back, leaning against a column, the hum of conversation dulling to background static. Lila took the stage, holding the microphone with quiet poise. Her voice carried differently, calm, deliberate, with a rhythm that drew every gaze. She spoke of art and truth, of how photographs could unmask entire worlds. Evan's heart slowed with each word. He knew where this was going. Across the room, Marianne smiled, unaware. The spark had caught, subtle, silent, inevitable. The lights dimmed. A projection screen descended from the ceiling, humming softly. Lila introduced the next segment, a tribute to the eyes that see beyond borders. The first image appeared, a war-torn street in Aleppo, sunlight piercing dust and rubble. Then another, a mother holding her child amid wreckage. Evan's photographs, each frame cut through the ballroom's false grandeur, carving silence into the air. He watched the audience shift, breathless, unaware that the ghost behind those images stood among them. Marianne's smile began to waver. Meryl began to waver. Lila's voice softened as she introduced the anonymous artist. A son of this very town, a man who's seen the worst of humanity, and still found beauty in it. A murmur spread. Marianne tilted her head, uneasy. Evan felt the weight of every breath in the room pressing against his ribs. The projector flickered, and his name appeared in elegant serif font. Evan Ride, Pulitzer Prize, winning photojournalist. For a heartbeat, time fractured. Gasps filled the silence, followed by the audible crack of a glass slipping from Marianne's hand. For the first time in years, Marianne's mask cracked. Her eyes darted toward the back of the room, seeking him. Evan didn't move. He let the truth hang there, his name echoing in whispers that carried both awe and confusion. Marianne's painted smile faltered, but she recovered just enough to clap weakly, pretending composure. Lila stepped aside, meeting Evan's gaze through the crowd. No words. Just the shared gravity of justice quietly delivered. He had spent a lifetime unseen. Now, invisibility had become her curse. The applause faded, replaced by murmurs. Marianne rose from her chair, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. The crowd turned to her expectantly, waiting for acknowledgement. A proud mother's smile, but her eyes never left Evan. He met her gaze, calm, unflinching, his silence sharper than any accusation. The distance between them felt vast, years of denial collapsing into a single, merciless moment. He didn't need to expose her further. The truth had already done it for him. The ballroom's music resumed out of habit, a nervous reflex to fill the silence truth had left behind. Marianne excused herself with brittle grace, claiming she needed air. The crowd parted like tide around her. Evan stayed where he was, motionless, watching her leave. Lila appeared beside him, her voice low. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, though the word didn't feel true. There was no satisfaction, only a strange stillness, as if the past had exhaled. He knew she'd come looking for him soon. Pride doesn't die quietly. The hotel corridor was colder, the music muffled behind closed doors. Marianne leaned against the wall, trembling hands clutching her clutch bag. Her reflection in the gilt mirror seemed older now, makeup cracked under the weight of truth. She'd spent years sculpting an image too fragile to survive honesty. Evan's name still echoed in her mind like a verdict. When the footsteps approached, she straightened, summoning that practiced poise. But it wasn't vanity now. It was armor. "Evan," she said, his name sharp, unfamiliar on her tongue. He stopped a few feet away. "You could have warned me," she continued, voice brittle. "Do you know what this will do to me?" Her words were trembling glass, every syllable cutting her pride. Evan's reply was quiet, almost kind. "You did it to yourself." The stillness that followed was heavier than anger. It was the weight of truth finally finding its place. She looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time saw not her son, but the man her absence had forged. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think humiliating me makes you noble?" Her words carried venom, but her hands shook. Evan's gaze never wavered. "I didn't say a word," he said softly. "I just stopped hiding." Marianne blinked, breath catching. For a moment, the practiced mask slipped, revealing exhaustion beneath vanity. She looked at her son as though seeing him through shattered glass, pieces of recognition cutting both ways. And for the first time, silence became confession. When she finally spoke again, her voice was a whisper. "You could have been proud of me." Evan's reply came after a long silence. "I could have been if you ever were of me." It wasn't shouted, just released like a final photograph exposed to light. Marianne's eyes filled, but no tears fell. She turned away, her reflection multiplying endlessly across the mirrors as she walked down the hall. Evan remained where he was, steady, the echo of her heels fading into quiet absolution. He didn't chase her. Some truths weren't meant to be comforted. The following morning, sunlight cut through the thin hotel curtains like a quiet verdict. Evan stood by the window, camera in hand, but he didn't raise it. The sea below was gray, restless, as if mirroring the unease inside him. A knock broke the silence. He didn't need to open the door to know who it was. Marianne's presence always carried its own pressure, the faint perfume of denial. He hesitated, then unlocked it. She entered without invitation, posture perfect as ever, eyes red around the edges. "You made me a spectacle," she said. Her voice was low, trembling under the weight of pride. Evan turned back to the ocean. "No," he said, "you made me invisible. I just stopped playing along." Marianne crossed the room slowly, her heels soundless on the carpet. "Do you think this makes you better than me?" she asked. Evan turned, finally meeting her eyes. "No," he said, "it makes me honest." The simplicity of his answer broke through her defenses like a blade slipping between ribs. "I did what I had to," she whispered, voice small now. "You wouldn't understand the sacrifices." Evan took a step closer, his tone even. I understand them. I live them. Silence filled the space between them, a decade of unspoken words collapsing into a fragile truce. Neither trusted. You could have told them I was your son, Evan said quietly. Marianne's lips parted, but no sound came. All these years you spoke of success, of grace, of family values, he continued, voice tightening. And when I finally built something real, something true, you hid from it. She swallowed hard. Because I was ashamed, she blurted, the confession sharp and accidental. The words hung there, raw and irreversible. Evan's expression didn't change, but his shoulders dropped slightly, as if the truth had weighed enough for both of them. At least, now we're honest, he said, barely above a whisper. Marianne sat down on the edge of the bed, the stiffness leaving her posture for the first time. You think I didn't love you, she said. But love was complicated for me. Evan stayed silent, letting her words unravel. I thought success would protect us. That if I looked perfect, no one would see how broken I was inside. Her hands twisted together in her lap. Evan exhaled softly. He tried to erase the cracks, he said, but those are the only parts that make us real. For a moment, they both just breathed. Two strangers bound by blood and silence. When she finally rose, her eyes were soft, unguarded. What happens now? She asked. Evan looked past her toward the open window where the ocean stretched endless and gray. Now, he said, we stop pretending. He lifted his camera, not to expose her, but to remember her. Not the woman who performed, but the one stripped bare of illusion. She didn't smile. She simply nodded, as if surrendering to the inevitable. When the shutter clicked, it wasn't vengeance he captured. It was release. Morning spread across the seaside town, soft and unhurried. The hotel ballroom, now empty, smelled faintly of champagne and wilting flowers. Evan walked through it alone, camera slung at his side. Last night's revelations had faded into whispers carried by the ocean wind. There was no spectacle, no scandal, just the quiet honesty of people realizing they'd known half-truths all along. He took a photo of the abandoned tables, the light filtering through lace curtains. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about preservation. Proof that even broken nights could end in still. Down by the pier, the town stirred awake. Locals nodded to him in quiet recognition, not admiration, not gossip, just acknowledgement. The truth had changed the air somehow. It felt cleaner. Evan bought a coffee from the same small cart that used to serve him as a teenager. The vendor, older now, smiled. Good to have you back, kid, he said simply. Evan returned the smile, realizing how little he'd needed the validation he once craved. Belonging wasn't about being seen. It was about no longer hiding. Later that day, Marianne sat in her garden. Not the ornate public one she used for guests, but the small private patch behind her house. The soil clung to her gloves. The sun warmed her shoulders. It had been years since she'd tended anything herself. Her reflection in the kitchen window looked different, softer, unmasked. She thought about Evan's words. We stopped pretending. For the first time, she understood what that meant. Pretending had cost her love. Honesty might yet earn her peace. That evening, Lila visited Marianne, not as a reporter, but as an old acquaintance. They spoke quietly over tea, neither trying to rewrite the past. He's at peace now, Lila said. Marianne nodded, tears threatening but never falling. I think I might be too, she replied. The conversation wasn't about forgiveness. It was about understanding, the slow kind that grows in silence. Outside, the sea murmured against the rocks, a rhythm older than guilt, older than pride. At dusk, Evan stood once more on the cliff overlooking the town. Below, the ocean churned with fading light. He lifted his camera and framed the horizon. The town small, the sky infinite. He didn't take the photo. Some moments were meant to be lived, not captured. The wind pressed against his coat, carrying the faint echo of his mother's voice. Softer now, no longer sharp. He smiled faintly, a man no longer defined by what was missing, but by what had been found. Truth, quiet, and the courage to begin again. Dawn crept across the cliffs like a slow forgiveness. Evan sat on the rocks, camera balanced on his knee, the horizon bleeding from violet into pale gold. Below, the tide folded over itself in endless motion. He had thought closure would feel louder, a final chord, a clean break, but instead it arrived as quiet acceptance. He wasn't the boy who left or the ghost who returned. He was simply here, breathing with the rhythm of the sea. The past hadn't vanished, but it no longer demanded to be rewritten. Back in her garden, Mary Ann watched the same sunrise from her window. She held an old photo of Evan at 10, his grin gap-toothed and pure. The image no longer hurt. It simply belonged to her. She whispered his name once, not as regret, but recognition. The world outside shimmered with dew, every blade of grass a new beginning. For the first time, she didn't wonder what the neighbors thought. She wondered whether her son was happy, and knew somehow that he was. Later that day, Evan met Lila at the pier. She was interviewing local artists for a follow-up feature, notebook in hand. "You'll be part of this one?" she asked with a smile. Evan laughed softly. "Maybe just the view." She nodded, understanding. They walked without agenda, their footsteps keeping time with the tide. The story she'd written had already traveled far, but the one that mattered most stayed between them, about friendship, memory, and the courage to return home. That evening, the town paper ran Lila's new article. The man behind the lens. It wasn't about fame, but about seeing how a photograph can reveal the heart behind the frame. Mary Ann clipped the story and placed it beside the old class photo on her mantle. The two images, the past and the present, finally looked at peace together. She exhaled, a quiet smile ghosting her lips. Maybe love wasn't erased after all. It had simply been waiting for the truth to make space for it. Night returned to the cliffs, calm and salt-sweet. Evan lifted his camera one last time and pressed the shutter, capturing the sea at rest beneath a moon that needed no witness. He looked at the photo on the display. Nothing extraordinary, just waves and light. Yet somehow it felt complete. He lowered the camera and let the wind take the moment. Tomorrow he would leave this town again, not in anger, but in peace. Behind him the ocean breathed, and for the first time, it sounded like home.